In mere seconds, a hidden explosive device is set to detonate, sealing the fate of every single soul on this flight. Down below, the collateral damage will be catastrophic as shattered metal rains from the heavens, completely decimating the quiet Scottish village of Lockerbie over the coming months. A massive coalition of cops, military personnel, and everyday civilians will scour the terrain for evidence, turning the landscape into an unprecedented historical crime scene because this wasn't some tragic glitch. It was an act of cold-blooded terror. This single event would launch an impossibly tangled, globe-spanning manhunt, kicking off a meticulous judicial inquiry that, almost 4 decades down the line, still haunts investigators. Even now, justice remains elusive. We're diving deep into one of the most lethal aviation disasters ever recorded, right at the exact moment a peaceful stretch of Scotland transformed into a planetary-scale murder scene. Most folks back in the States couldn't fully wrap their heads around the sheer scale of the carnage, but over in the UK, it remains their deadliest aviation nightmare, leaving behind an eternally open docket and relentless, nagging questions about Lockerbie. The Pan Am Flight 103 Lockerbie Legacy Foundation spent years gathering sworn testimonies from survivors and grieving families, including Shona Black Harkness, who still grapples with the agonizing question, why her tiny hometown, and why was she caught in the crossfire? Let's set the scene. It's the week before Christmas in Lockerbie, a tight-knit community of roughly 3,000 residents, and right before 7 o'clock in the evening, Shona is standing on a porch with her little sister and niece, pressing a doorbell. They're loaded down with holiday gifts for a buddy named Diane, who pulls them out of the cold. But out of nowhere, the entire foundation starts to violently vibrate, which the women brush off as just a heavy freight train rolling by. In reality, it was the shockwave of a catastrophic blast. As testimonies would later reveal, the kitchen windows suddenly shattered inward, followed instantly by a wall of roaring fire tearing through the property. Going into pure survival mode, they dragged the terrified, screaming little ones into a corner, throwing their bodies over them like human shields and holding their ground while the earth violently quaked. Once the deafening roar finally subsided and they ensured the kids were unhurt, Shona ventured out the front door, only to be met with an apocalyptic wasteland littered with twisted airplane debris, blown-out luggage, and scattered travel documents. Among the wreckage lay a stunningly beautiful young woman, resting on her side, looking almost peacefully asleep save for a single scratch across her cheek, with her hair eerily untouched by the chaotic plunge. Even her outfit was perfectly intact. As the initial shock wore off, the grim reality dawned on the locals. A commercial airliner had just literally dropped out of the heavens, a fact confirmed as horrifying breaking news hit the airwaves later that evening. Emergency responders from every corner of the United Kingdom scrambled to intercept what was quickly shaping up to be the nation's most catastrophic aviation disaster. Triggered just past the 7 o'clock hour, a massive commercial jumbo jet plummeted directly into a quiet border town. First-hand accounts reported a monstrous fireball and an intensely bright flash that mirrored a thermonuclear detonation, followed by an agonizing shower of flaming shrapnel. Whole residential blocks were absolutely leveled. Reports indicated that properties on the southern edge of town were practically wiped off the map, and by morning light, the true, gut-wrenching scope of the flattened neighborhoods was undeniably clear. Ground Zero featured a monstrous impact crater stretching roughly 50 meters in length and plunging more than 10 meters down, marking the exact spot where the jet's wings and main body slammed into the earth after the cockpit violently snapped off. Chillingly, that severed nose section sat in a field relatively unscathed, the airline's painted logo perfectly readable for the swarming press photographers. While on the ground, 11 innocent townspeople had already been pronounced dead. The tragic final tally revealed that all 259 souls on that flight perished, the majority being American citizens heading back for the holidays. But amidst the intense grief, a glaring investigative red flag popped up. The flight crew never once radioed a mayday. Plus, locals swore the bird blew apart miles above the ground, One witness recalled sitting beside their aunt when a gigantic, mushroom shaped cloud of fire whipped right past their living room window, triggering a frantic dash for survival. While some early theories pointed toward a catastrophic mechanical breakdown, investigators rapidly pivoted to a far more sinister motive: foul play involving a smuggled explosive. Immediately, a colossal recovery effort was greenlit. Over the ensuing months, a massive task force composed of local law enforcement, military troops, and American federal agents systematically swept the Scottish countryside, backed by an army of thousands of civilian volunteers. With choppers running aerial surveillance overhead, the marching orders for the ground crews were remarkably simple. If an object isn't a stone and it's not a living plant, bag it and tag it for the evidence locker. The shrapnel field spanned an astonishing 2,000 square kilometers, forcing recovery units to spend an entire year tracking down airplane parts that had drifted all the way to the jagged coastline of the North Sea. Search parties ultimately hiked 2.4 million kilometers, snapped 35,000 forensic photos, and logged roughly 16,000 personal artifacts, prompting one seasoned FBI operative to dub it the most expansive crime scene humanity had ever seen. Just a few days into the grueling grid search, detectives secured a game-changing breakthrough: a heavily warped, puncture-riddled metal track totally scorched by intense thermal damage. It appeared to be structural framing from a luggage bin. Not long after, a second matching shard was recovered, proving they were part of the identical chassis, and the crime lab quickly flagged unmistakable chemical signatures of a blast. 7 days later, the lead inspectors faced the media, officially confirming that the chemical swabbings pulled from the wreckage were an exact match for military-grade, high-velocity explosives. There was zero doubt left someone had intentionally blown Pan Am Flight 103 out of the sky. Barely a week post-disaster, the tragedy was upgraded to a full-blown homicide docket, launching an unparalleled, relentless pursuit for the killers. Nailing the culprits demanded unprecedented cross-border teamwork, forcing Scottish detectives and American federal agents to lock arms. They approached the sprawling debris field like the ultimate jigsaw puzzle, treating every single scrap of metal as a critical clue. All that twisted evidence was hauled to a Royal Air Force munitions base roughly 28 kilometers out from town, where forensic specialists methodically mapped out the fragments on a massive hangar floor, relying on factory stamps and serial numbers. These tiny details allowed them to painstakingly reconstruct the jet's anatomy. The layout got so ridiculously massive that investigators had to ride bikes just to navigate the room, but it paid off. They pinpointed the exact detonation epicenter inside the front cargo bay. That specific hold had been packed with 12 freight bins and a couple of loading pallets, yet only 2 took the brunt of the explosive force. Deeper forensic analysis traced the primary shockwave straight back to one specific bin stuffed with checked bags. The breakthrough came when technicians isolated a 20-centimeter shred of brown polymer belonging to a Samsonite Silhouette 4000. Convinced the lethal payload was stashed inside, the Bureau immediately launched a frantic hunt to track down the bag's owner. Unfortunately, the airline's baggage logs were an absolute disaster, leaving agents hitting dead ends. Just as frustration peaked, they stumbled onto a microscopic game changer: a jagged piece of a printed circuit board no bigger than a pinky nail. Lab techs cross-referenced that tiny chip against a massive hardware database, linking it directly to the internal guts of a specific line of Toshiba boomboxes. This revelation set off massive alarm bells, connecting to intelligence gathered just a couple of months prior. Specifically, German cops had previously busted a radical Palestinian terror cell and seized a bomb cleverly disguised inside that exact same brand of radio. The writing was on the wall. The device that shredded Pan Am Flight 103 shared the same deadly DNA. Knowing the explosive was concealed in a portable stereo, authorities demanded hard proof. Months down the line, they trucked the entire mountain of wreckage down to Farnborough, England, straight to the doorstep of the top-tier air crash investigation branch. Operating out of their primary command center, experts spent grueling hours painstakingly rebuilding a 20-meter chunk of the plane's outer shell, effectively resurrecting the aircraft as a towering, three-dimensional ghost ship. Fusing all these forensic puzzle pieces finally showed the task force exactly how such a compact explosive could completely compromise a commercial airliner. Cut to a flashback. It's late in the afternoon, and the giant bird is idling near a gate just southeast of Terminal 3. You're looking at a classic Boeing 747 flying under the Pan Am banner, a carrier that literally pioneered the jumbo jet era back in the late 1960s and absolutely dominated the skies for decades. They were America's undisputed heavyweight champion of international travel, famous for that signature, picture-perfect corporate smile. But behind the scenes, the business was bleeding cash, and the massive aircraft currently getting prepped on the tarmac was feeling its age. With 18 solid years of service under its belt, the jet proudly bore the title Clipper Made of the Seas stamped right on its side. Meanwhile, a connecting flight from Frankfurt had just dumped 109 tired travelers into the terminal. Pan Am Flight 103 was lined up to carry a chunk of those German commuters back across the pond to New York and Detroit, while another 194 unsuspecting passengers were getting ready to board at London Heathrow. Baggage arriving from Frankfurt gets shifted over to the jet in what looks like a completely routine operation. Assuming the cargo had already cleared strict security protocols overseas, the crew waves it through without any secondary inspections. Tucked inside that payload sits a totally ordinary brown Samsonite bag, securely packed into a bin and stowed right in the forward belly of the jet. By 6:04 p.m., 243 souls are strapped into their seats as the massive aircraft rolls out toward the tarmac. Exactly 21 minutes after that, Pan Am Flight 103 lifts off, kicking off its leap across the pond. Up in the flight deck, Captain James McQuarrie smoothly steers the massive wide body through thick, overcast skies. The veteran aviator easily wrestles with the fierce evening tailwinds battering the airframe. Right at 6:56 p.m., the aircraft climbs to a cruising altitude right around 9,400 meters, closing in on the airspace above the Scottish border. Back in the cabin, behind the trio of flight deck officers, 13 flight attendants are working the aisles. Beverage service is in full swing, with headsets being passed around to the travelers. Clocking in at 6:58 p.m., First Officer Ray Wagner gets on the radio to relay their coordinates, and just 4 minutes later, at 7:02 p.m., Air Traffic Control gives the Clipper Made of the Seas the green light for its oceanic crossing. Sadly, it is a journey it will never finish. Down in the cargo bay, that nondescript brown Samsonite holds a deadly piece of evidence, an ordinary-looking radio bind. Concealed within its plastic shell sits roughly 450 grams of high explosives hooked up to a detonator. Precisely 50 seconds past 7:02 p.m., the countdown runs out. The following moments unfold with terrifying speed. The initial blast punches a violent breach straight through the luggage bin, ripping into the aircraft's exterior hull right at this precise spot, while simultaneously shattering the passenger deck right above the detonation zone. This explosion acts like a massive bubble of pressurized gas, violently buckling the jet's outer metallic layer. While a fraction of this destructive energy vents out into the freezing atmosphere, a massive chunk of that force ricochets violently inside the cargo hold. This devastating shockwave forcefully squeezes itself through the tight gap, separating the baggage bins from the aircraft's outer shell. Compounding the disaster, acoustic echoes and volatile chemical combustions spawn a secondary blast wave. This force bows the aluminum outward, stretching and mangling the hull around the initial breach as the deadly overpressure surges onward. It ruthlessly snakes through the skeletal framework of the jet, rapidly striking both the ceiling and the belly of the aircraft. This intense stress triggers a cascading series of structural fractures, tearing the original hole even wider. Aircraft-grade aluminum literally peels backward, contorting into a jagged, star-like shape. Meanwhile, shock waves bounce relentlessly through the hidden voids lining the roof and the underbelly, generating an unstoppable surge of extreme internal pressure. This catastrophic buildup begins tearing the forward portion of the aircraft to pieces, systematically shredding the connection between the upper and lower fuselage. Structural supports beneath the passenger floor completely buckle and give way, sucking debris, baggage, and tragically, human beings out into the night sky. By this split second, the only thing tethering the cockpit to the main cabin is a fragile strip of metal along the window line, rendering the aircraft's structural integrity virtually non existent. Barely 2 or 3 seconds following the detonation, this critical junction snaps entirely. The massive front end violently yaws toward the right, before completely shearing off and whipping backward over the top of the jet. It slams brutally into one of the power plants, ripping the engine cleanly off the wing. Stripped of its nose, the very component that slices through the air and stabilizes the craft, the decapitated fuselage forcefully pitches upward. The crippled jet then enters a vicious leftward roll. While the severed flight deck plummets earthward, the primary airframe continues disintegrating in midair, shedding its remaining jet engines one by one. Once the vertical stabilizer snaps away, the aft cabin section is essentially dragged sideways through the sky until it too breaks off. Eventually, the massive wings succumb to the aerodynamic forces and completely fracture. The exact sequence of that final structural failure remains heavily debated by crash investigators, but those massive debris chunks soon rain down on the quiet town of Lockerbie. Impacting the earth, they detonate into an apocalyptic fireball, gouging a massive crater into the soil. The ensuing shockwave alone rips the roofs off more than 12 surrounding homes. Simultaneously, an 18-meter chunk of the passenger cabin slams directly into a residential street, spraying scattered baggage and victims across driveways and neighborhood backyards. All told, a staggering 300 tons of twisted metal, personal belongings, and casualties blanket the region, with gale force winds dragging lighter fragments all the way out to the North Sea. Meanwhile, the severed cockpit, carrying the 3 aviators and a handful of first-class travelers, is instantly pancaked upon impact, smashing into a field on its port side roughly 4 kilometers east of the town limits. 270 lives were snuffed out that dark evening. But the real tragedy for prosecutors? This bloodbath might have been entirely preventable. Merely weeks before the skies rained fire, a chilling phone call rings into the United States Embassy over in Finland. It is a direct terror threat, with an unidentified voice promising that within a fortnight, a bomb would take down a Pan Am jet flying out of Frankfurt, bound for American soil. Relatives of the deceased are left absolutely furious, demanding to know under oath why this intelligence was buried. Stepping up to the microphone, then Vice President George H.W. Bush defends the controversial silence on live television, arguing that broadcasting such threats often just hands the terrorists exactly the kind of massive public spotlight they are desperately craving. Barely 24 hours post-disaster, 4 separate organizations rush to take credit for the massacre. The suspect pool ranges from Iranian operatives to Irish militants, not to mention a notorious Palestinian extremist faction, whose explosive device had recently been busted by German authorities. Intelligence analysts at the CIA initially zero in on the Iranian faction as the prime suspect. The working theory? Pure retaliation. You see, roughly half a year prior to the Lockerbie tragedy, American naval warships blew an Iranian commercial flight out of the sky over the Persian Gulf. The Pentagon later chalked the horrific error up to mistaking the civilian jetliner for a hostile fighter plane, a blunder that cost 290 innocent lives. Yet, for all the wild theories floating around the courtroom, the actual criminal probe grinds to a frustrating crawl. Detectives chase down tips pointing to a dozen different nations, but every single one turns out to be a dead end. The first major break in the case finally surfaces in 1989. Forensics teams taking a second look at shredded textiles recovered from the debris field zero in on a tiny fragment of scorched trousers. Traced back to a label known as Yorkie, these pants had been packed directly alongside the explosives. That single scrap of cloth acts like a breadcrumb, guiding federal agents all the way to a tiny boutique on the Mediterranean shores of Malta. Detectives sit down with the proprietor, a guy named Tony Gautsy. Under questioning, Gautsy vividly recalls a highly unusual interaction when a specific patron strolled through his doors. This mystery shopper basically bought every random item Gautsy pitched him, totally ignoring what size they were. We are talking an infant's onesie, a dark umbrella, a heavy wool coat, and those infamous Yorkie slacks. Since the shopkeeper has a razor-sharp memory of the buyer's face, the FBI flies a forensic artist out to the island to draft up a composite sketch. Law enforcement grills the owner repeatedly, sliding endless mugshots of known extremists across the table. But the witness shoots down every single one. Frustrated but determined, the Bureau deploys a strike team of investigators to Malta with a single mission: map out the entire border traffic. During the critical window right around the terror plot, that meant manually digging through mountains of physical customs documents. Then, over 12 months into the grueling manhunt, the investigative team spots a true smoking gun hiding in the wreckage. It is a microscopic chunk of a printed circuit board, tinier than a thumbnail, which the explosive force had violently fused right into the collar of a dress shirt. That shirt was also stuffed inside the fatal Samsonite bag. Yet this fragment clearly didn't belong to the bomb-rigged Toshiba cassette player. Scottish authorities frantically worked to build a chain of custody, and backed by the CIA, they finally hit pay dirt. A few months prior to the mass murder, authorities down in Senegal had busted a pair of Libyan operatives hauling a digital detonator. That device was a dead match for the microchip pulled from the Scottish mud, and those men were also caught lugging 8 kilos of plastic explosives, the exact same chemical signature identified at the disaster site. Now, considering Libya's bloody resume of funding global terror cells dating back to the 1970s, they had been prime suspects for the prosecution from day one. Moreover, investigators finally have a crystal clear motive to present to the jury. Flashback to the 5th of April, 1986, just shy of 2 a.m., a massive blast guts a West Berlin discotheque known as a wildly popular hangout for off-duty American troops. That horrific night left 3 dead and injured over 200 more, with international outrage immediately pointing the finger squarely at Libya and its dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. The strike was viewed as a blatant, calculated hit job against American citizens. This move was almost certainly payback. Just weeks prior, American forces had sent 2 Libyan vessels to the bottom of the sea, and Washington's counterstrike followed hot on the heels of the deadly blast at a Berlin nightclub. Addressing the nation, the commander-in-chief announced that right at 7 o'clock Eastern Time that night, American combat aircraft and naval fleets had unleashed a coordinated barrage against command centers. The targets included militant training grounds and strategic military hardware backing Muammar Gaddafi's rogue operations. President Ronald Reagan explicitly greenlit American troops to rain fire down on the Libyan strongholds of Tripoli. Benghazi was also hit in the crosshairs. While the Pentagon insisted they were only hunting military objectives, state-run broadcasts out of Libya reported that everyday citizens were caught in the fatal blast radius. Even Gaddafi's own adopted daughter perished in the fallout. Did the Libyan dictator orchestrate the Lockerbie nightmare as a brutal tit-for-tat? Investigators briefly chased down 2 Libyan nationals nabbed in Senegal, but that lead quickly evaporated. However, a highly specific electronic timing device found on them pointed detectives straight to a Swiss firm named Mebo. Tech experts quickly verified that this exact manufacturer had built the mechanism. That same hardware matched a microscopic shard of a circuit board recovered from the Lockerbie wreckage. Detectives also uncovered that the Swiss supplier had shipped a batch of these identical timers straight to the Libyan armed forces, steadily building a massive circumstantial case against the North African nation. As the FBI dug deeper into the downing of Pan Am Flight 103, federal agents interrogated the men running Mebo. When shown a police sketch of a mystery buyer from Malta, one of the owners instantly pointed a finger at the drawing. The executive insisted they had crossed paths professionally and dropped a name: Abdelbasset Ali al-Megrahi, a known operative for Libyan state intelligence. Law enforcement eventually hunted down a photograph of this shadowy figure. Detectives slid the photo across the table to Tony Gautzi, the Maltese shop owner. Gautzi testified that out of every mugshot he had reviewed, this guy was the dead ringer for his enigmatic shopper. Finally, following years of grinding investigative legwork, authorities had a concrete target in their sights, and the trap started closing in. Flight manifests and travel logs placed Megrahi squarely in Malta on December 7th, 1988. That was the exact date someone bought suspicious clothing from Gauchi's storefront. Meanwhile, luggage tracking data out of Frankfurt flagged a rogue, ownerless suitcase transferring from Malta straight to the doomed New York-bound Pan Am flight. Detectives also figured out that Megrahi wasn't just some run-of-the-mill spy. He actually ran security operations for a state-owned Libyan air carrier, giving him the ultimate all-access pass to roam the Maltese terminals completely unchallenged. He had even flashed a forged passport to slip onto the island the very morning the disaster unfolded. Could he be the mastermind who checked that explosive-rigged bag from Malta all the way onto Flight 103? Chasing down another promising thread, agents zeroed in on an aviation executive based in Malta. Just like his counterpart, this guy, Al-Amin Khalifa Fima, had deep ties to Tripoli's spy network, and border control documents proved the two men were hanging out on the exact day the jet was blown out of the sky. FEMA possessed total clearance to grab official Air Malta routing tags, meaning he could effortlessly ghost a lethal piece of luggage onto a Frankfurt-bound plane. Then, the ultimate smoking gun dropped into their laps: an informant. This witness swore under oath that FEMA was stashing bomb-making materials right at the terminal, and that both operatives were spotted together just 24 hours prior to the detonation, lugging around a massive brown suitcase. Almost 36 months after the skies rained fire over Lockerbie, authorities had locked onto two prime suspects, and their identities were about to be plastered across the globe. On November 14th, 1991, one of the most massive manhunts in law enforcement history culminated in an earth-shattering indictment. Prosecutors declared that a pair of Libyan bureaucrats running covert missions for their nation's secret police partnered with an underground cell to arm and trigger the explosive device that obliterated the Pan Am jumbo jet. They officially fingered state spies Abdelbasset Ali, al-Megrahi, and Al-Amin Khalifa Fima, demanding they face a judge and jury. Lead attorneys from both the United States and the United Kingdom were dead certain that the entire sovereign nation of Libya, taking direct orders from Muammar Gaddafi, had blood on its hands. The district attorneys officially branded the two operatives as international fugitives running from the law. Washington and London aggressively demanded their immediate handover for a criminal trial, but the Libyan autocrat flat out rejected the ultimatum. Washing his hands of the whole affair, Gaddafi offered a counter-proposal to prosecute his men in a local domestic court. Years dragged on, diplomatic talks hit a brick wall, and massive economic blockades were slapped on the country, yet the stalemate held strong. A full decade following the Mid-Air massacre, the dictator finally caved to a middle ground solution. The accused duo would face the music in a neutral Dutch setting, though strictly governed by the Scottish legal code, setting the stage at Camp Zeist. This decommissioned American Army outpost outside Utrecht was essentially carved out and legally transformed into sovereign Scottish soil. 11 long years later, the grief was still raw and visible as family members of the fallen touched down, prepping for a courtroom showdown unlike anything seen before in legal history. Scores of heartbroken relatives flew into Holland to stare down the operatives indicted for slaughtering 270 innocent souls. Yet, whispers of a cover-up lingered. How could only two mid-level goons take the fall when the highest echelons of the regime absolutely had to have rubber-stamped the hit? The prosecution's theory claimed these hitmen tucked the device into ordinary luggage and jet set to Malta 24 hours before doomsday. According to the indictment, they then routed the lethal bag totally unaccompanied toward America, bouncing it through Frankfurt and London. Both McGrahy and FEMA boldly swore they were entirely innocent, while their defense attorneys countered that a radical Palestinian faction actually rigged the explosive. The grueling judicial marathon ground out over several months, pulling over 230 people to the witness stand, sweeping up baggage handlers, locals from the Scottish crash zone, a defector from Tripoli's spy rings, and the Maltese merchant, Tony Gauci. Then, on January 31st, 2001, the Scottish bench dropped the ultimate bombshell. McGrahy was found guilty. FEMA, however, walked free. You would think nailing the primary suspect would slam the book shut, but it only triggered a massive wave of skepticism, particularly for one determined father who firmly believed that absolute facts always surface eventually. He desperately wanted his child's tragic end to stand for raw honesty and an uncompromising quest for justice. That man was Dr. Jim Swire, a medical professional from the UK. Having lost his little girl in the fiery wreckage, he openly blasted the verdict against McGrahy on television. The magistrate's logic just didn't hold water for him, and even an official United Nations watchdog went on record calling the entire conviction completely illogical. A prominent legal scholar in Scotland labeled the whole circus a procedural success, but an absolute miscarriage of justice. Swire aggressively tore into the prosecution's pillars, zeroing right in on the incredibly shaky reliability of the retail clerk, Tony Gauci, and the deeply contested backstory of the detonator. Digging deeper revealed that the merchant was incredibly wishy-washy about recognizing the suspect, totally contradicting the bulletproof narrative fed to the judges, and rumors swirled that cops threw serious cash at him to secure the ID. Things got crazier when the Swiss tech executive completely backpedaled on his sworn testimony. Suddenly, he was insisting that the mangled electronic scrap pulled from the Scottish mud absolutely did not originate from the batch he shipped to North Africa, further convincing the UN monitor that the guilty ruling was bogus. The state's entire narrative hinged on these two secret agents moving in lockstep to rig the disaster. If they were an inseparable trigger team, how on earth did a panel of judges only send one of them away? Despite the massive holes, an appellate bench rubber-stamped the guilty verdict in March 2002. They slammed him with a life sentence, mandating he sit behind bars for no less than 20 years. Barely 12 months later, Tripoli officially stepped up to the mic and took the rap for the jumbo jet massacre. The regime pledged a staggering $2.7 billion in blood money to the shattered families, though the dictator's own son would later casually remark that writing the check was purely a business move to crush the crippling trade embargoes. To the rest of the world, though, it sounded exactly like a signed confession. Meanwhile, Swire relentlessly pounded the pavement, demanding a full retrial, finally forcing the Scottish authorities to cave. Right as the legal wheels started turning again, the convicted bomber was hit with a fatal prostate cancer diagnosis. Given only months to breathe, the powers that be in 2009 sprung him from his cell on humanitarian grounds and put him on a flight back to North Africa. He touched down on home soil to a rock star reception, broadcasting agonizing, gut-wrenching visuals that felt like a slap in the face to the victims' loved ones. 36 months after walking free, McGrahy finally succumbed to his illness. Fast forward to 2017, and his bloodline officially launched a fierce post-mortem legal battle to clear his name. 4 years down the line, the Scottish High Bench threw the challenge out the window, keeping the conviction chiseled in stone. The dictator who supposedly called the shot had already met a bloody end back in 2011 during a massive rebel uprising. Yet the shadow of the doomed flight continued to haunt the globe. Exactly 32 years have passed since explosives tore Pan Am Flight 103 out of the sky. And now, on this grim anniversary, prosecutors just slapped a fresh round of indictments on another accused ghost in this never ending terror plot. Fast forward to the year 2020, and the judicial crosshairs lock onto a fresh target: Libyan intelligence operative Abu Aguila Massoud. Prosecutors officially indicted him as the architect who engineered the explosive device, rigged the countdown mechanism, and forwarded that deadly Samsonite suitcase directly into the cargo routing of Pan Am Flight 103. The United States Justice Department argues he readily admitted to his role during a grueling interrogation at a Libyan holding facility in 2012. Fast forwarding to the early months of 2026, Massoud finally faced an American magistrate. From the defense table, he vehemently pleaded not guilty, testifying that his earlier admission was completely fabricated, coerced by a trio of unidentified masked men who ruthlessly threatened his life and his loved ones. Complicating the evidentiary record, the Libyan authority who allegedly captured that 2012 interrogation claimed the crucial audio tape had mysteriously vanished. Yet, around the beginning of March 2025, fresh intelligence files suddenly emerged, pinning the blame right back on the collapsed Libyan dictatorship. To this very moment, a pair of advocacy coalitions representing the American casualties firmly reject Dr. Jim Swire and his unwavering campaign to prove the original suspect's innocence. These victim groups have also openly condemned a newly broadcast television drama featuring Oscar recipient Colin Firth stepping into the shoes of Swire. For the grieving relatives caught in the wake of this catastrophic tragedy, nearly 40 grueling years have ticked by, completely defined by profound sorrow, bitter resentment, and an unending hunger for the truth. That rigorous investigative inquiry marches on today, and when dealing with the sprawling legal complexities of the Lockerbie disaster, the ultimate closure they seek might forever remain out of reach. The shattered skies over Lockerbie on a cold December night in 1988 left behind more than a massive crater. They left a gaping wound in the hearts of thousands. The tragic loss of 270 innocent souls aboard Pan Am Flight 103 stands as a haunting reminder of the devastating human cost of blind hatred and terrorism. Yet, from the smoking wreckage and the darkest depths of grief, an extraordinary lesson in human resilience emerged. For nearly 4 decades, investigators, mothers, fathers, and daughters have relentlessly combed through the debris of shattered lives. Their unyielding pursuit of justice teaches us a profound truth. While acts of terror can destroy steel and steal away our loved ones in a violent instant, they can never extinguish the enduring power of love. The legacy of Lockerbie is not just a story of a bomb. It is a testament to the unwavering demand for accountability. It challenges us to remain vigilant against the forces of hatred and to cherish every fleeting moment we have with those we hold dear. We must carry their memory forward, standing united in the conviction that the truth matters, justice is always worth fighting for, and light will eventually pierce through the darkest of nights.